You're Dr. Audrey Tang, and you are a chartered psychologist and well-being expert. But that's just a title because you are doing so much more. You've written 3 books so far.
Yes.
Be a Great Manager in 2016, The Leader's Guide to Mindfulness in 2018, and this year, The Leader's Guide to Resilience came out. And you've got awards from this book, obviously. You're also very present on TV. You were recently on Don't Diet, Lose Weight on Channel 4. How was it?
Lots of fun. It was absolutely wonderful working with the contributors. It was a fantastic team. And it was so lovely to see their progress as well. And the best thing about that particular show was that it took weight loss or the concept in a really positive way. It didn't focus on the rules and restrictions that so many programs do, and really focused on the mindset and the motivations. And that's a big deal, actually. I think
you've been a resident psychologist on the Chrissy B Show for pretty much since the beginning, isn't it?
Pretty much. I think I joined 2 years after the show started.
That's where we met, and it's just an amazing show, and all the contributors are amazing. So I'm so grateful I had this opportunity to meet you there. You're also the host of the Wellbeing Lounge on NLive Radio.
Yes, and I love that because it's such a great opportunity to just give a few practical tips and tools about well-being. A lot of the time when we think about well-being, we think it's something that comes naturally to us. So, for example, how often have you said to somebody, oh, just concentrate, you know, just do it. And actually you sit there and when you unpick it, you think, I don't think I've ever learned. I don't think I've really learned to concentrate, as an example. We have learned to be distracted because our phones keep going off, our emails, our social media platforms. And what we practice at, we get good at. So what we actually need to do is learn those little practical tools and tips in order to feel a little bit better about ourselves.
And you've got your own podcast as well called Retrain the Brain. So what's the difference between your radio show and your podcast?
The radio show, I have a wonderful opportunity to welcome in guests like yourself. So I can cover a much broader spectrum. We talked about nutrition and the menopause. I have got tonight, in fact, the wonderful Dr. Meg Arrell is going to be talking about rituals and the power of having a well-being ritual to make us feel calm and to minimize stress. We are really able to explore a lot of different techniques, hear from a lot of different perspectives from people who've been working in those fields, but also sometimes I'm able to bring out some life stories of my guests where people, even though they're working in well-being, we've all been through things, and it's really nice to connect on that personal level. So that, and then in contrast with that, the podcast is pretty much just me talking for 10 minutes on a topic relating to well-being, resilience, the things that I deliver training on.
You're doing a lot more than what I've just listed, like you're teaching, you're giving keynotes, you're acting as well, if I remember well.
I was. I mean, I have always had drama in my background.
So today I wanted to discuss more specifically menopause and resilience, because your last book is on resilience. When did it come out?
The book came out at the beginning of this year. It's funny, this particular book, I started writing it before the pandemic, and then I finished it towards the end of the pandemic, or towards the end of the second lockdown. And the wonderful thing about this was that I revised a lot of what I was talking about, because when you are actually facing a crisis of sorts, and crisis can be very different things to different people, you get an idea of how you're coping, what strategies you're using, what's useful for other people, and what things that you might have said before actually being in the midst of it all don't really work anymore. So for me, it was wonderful to have that. I think it was a real advantage, and a lot of it really centers now on the importance of our network, the importance of doing those little things to help build our own energy, and also the fact that we don't need to wait until crisis to start building our emotional and mental fitness. And that's something that I think is really, really important. And even with crisis, what resilience research has shown us is that it's not simply about bouncing back and coming back to where we were, but actually the changes we have to make, the adaptations we have to make, the flexibility we have to show, that sets us up to thrive and to actually bounce back further or higher, to spring forward, if you will.
Actually, I realize we've been using the term resilience, knowing each other what it means, but perhaps you need to explain again, you know, for those who may not know, what does it mean, resilience?
Well, it does come from the Latin to bounce back or to jump, but a lot of the original research into resilience was very much about what gives people the ability to cope under crisis. Now, there is a school of thought that pretty much evolutionary says, well, we're kind of instinctively programmed to survive. That's what our brain is wanting us to do. So that can't really be resilience. And then Carver did a lot of research and found that resilience is one of 4 outcomes to crisis. One outcome can be you succumb to it. That's it. It gets the better of you. The second is you survive, but you are impeded in some way. You have injury or you're affected in some way. The third way is you bounce back. You come back to where you were. The fourth way is because of the way you've adapted, because of the things that you've put into place, you've actually pivoted yourself and laid the foundations in order to flourish and to thrive and to go further than you did before. And we actually only need to look at the example of businesses who have been pivot in the pandemic. They are the ones who have really improved. They've extended their client base. They've changed some of their offerings. And now, as things are beginning to open, they are going back to including some of their old ideas and their old methods, but using the new ones at the same time, blending both.
I thought I knew what resilience was, but actually with you explaining that, I realized that for me, resilience is about, you know, being in a crisis and coming out almost okay and just keep going. It was not about, you know, coming out in a much better position. So wow, it's it's such a great discovery. How do we typically build resilience? Can you give us some example? Because it sounds like too good to be true, you know.
One way of building resilience is actually minimizing our stress response. So the physical response to stress is that the brain sends a load of messages to our hormones and it releases cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It's cortisol that prepares our body to fight or to run away. And that's the one that makes us not want to eat because we need to conserve the sugar. It makes us not want to sleep because obviously we need to take action. The problem is cortisol, the effects of it, they're not supposed to be long term. They're not supposed to hang around for a long time. And if we get used to a low level of cortisol, that can be quite damaging to us. That can start playing havoc with our sleep. That can start playing havoc with our appetite, our ability to exercise, and so on. And that leads to more physical problems. One element of resilience is actually building up our ability to minimize the amount of cortisol that's released. And proven methods to do that through research have been things like laughter, having healthy relationships, even stroking a pet. Children who stroked a pet before going in for surgery, they reported having lower feelings of anxiety, and they had lower levels of cortisol being released compared to the ones who didn't. So those are simple ways of almost creating a buffer to some of the stresses. The second thing that we need to learn when it comes to resilience is being able to release ourselves from the holds of stress and cortisol. So an example of that would be if you're driving at night and you have to be very alert. Of course, we can't avoid stress because we need it to stay alive. But there's no point, and it's not good for us to remain in that heightened state of anxiety. So having a way of returning our state of equanimity, returning to our state of calm, is very helpful. Now, I'm not saying at the point of crisis, if you suddenly start doing breathing exercises, it's going to work. It's really not, unless you've practiced it for some time, unless you already know that is something that works for you. But it might not be breathing exercises. You might have realized that actually a certain piece of music makes you feel great, a certain smell, a certain texture, all of those things, they're your own ways of coming down from that heightened point of stress. But the other thing that we can do when it comes to building resilience is see it as doing little things to create enough headspace to minimize and regulate the emotion of that crisis in order to think better. So what I mean by this is, at a time of stress, we seem to get very one-track minded, very blinkered. We focus on one thing only. And if we find a way of being able to take a step back, being able to free up some of that energy, we can actually find that we can choose a different response. So a lot of the exercises, yes, deep breathing, yes, affirmations, yes, finding things to laugh at, yes, spending time with wonderful people, and yes, setting boundaries, all of those can go a long way to both minimizing the amount of cortisol that is produced, to helping us recognize what's going to calm us down, and also to just making us feel a little bit better anyway, which just means we're more likely to be able to keep going and actually quite enjoy it. If you think about mental and emotional fitness as you do physical fitness, you wouldn't walk into a gym and expect to be able to press 200 pounds without...
Some people do.
Yeah, you can try. You can try, but if you have not practiced it, if you've not put in the effort to do that, if you're not of that build, if you're not of that structure, it's not going to happen. However, if you work up to it, if you strengthen those muscles, you never know. And that's the same thing with building emotional and mental fitness. It's not, you can't go into crisis and expect to think, yeah, that's it, I can do this. But what you do need to do is you do need to do these little things outside the point of crisis. That's what's going to help you the most.
How do you think women going through the menopause can prepare to this big change and transformation in their life?
One of the most important things will actually be to voice it, to talk about it, to let people know what's going on. And we don't, whether it's a British thing, we don't like to bother other people. We don't like to burden other people. We don't like to cause problems.
Well, you know, surprisingly, British women are the one being able to talk about menopause the most in Europe or in the world.
Which is good, because the more we can talk about it, but not just in a venting kind of way. I mean, really talk about it in a let's get something done way. So talking to your employers about it, talking to your spouse about it, talking to your children to some extent about it, just because that way, if you can explain, well, sometimes I'm going to need this, or this is why I do that, or this is what I need, and so on, it becomes a lot easier. And you're not burdening anyone then. You are giving people your solution that works for you, and they also therefore know how to work with you. It's a collaborative thing. So that would be one thing. Other things that we can do is go to the doctor, again, speak up about it to the appropriate people. And it might even be, for example, I believe I'm in perimenopause at the moment, and my iron is absolutely, it's really, really bad. I originally thought I could manage it all with supplements you can get over the counter. You absolutely can't. The stuff I need has to be prescribed. And the reason I know that is after I started taking the prescription, I felt so much better. But you have to go out and then you have to go and ask. And if you're not happy, you have to ask again. So that's where resilience comes into it, because we're very used to, when we're speaking to figures of authority or experts, we A, don't want to do it in the first place, and B, if they say something, we think, oh yes, of course I must do it. If it does not work for you, you need to be A, in touch with your body and aware of what's going to work for you, and B, confident and assertive enough to be able to question it and say, is there something else that is going to work better? We can use mindfulness in its very practical terms in everyday life, no matter what, because mindfulness is a little bit like pressing pause on a very fast-paced life. And when you say to people, what is mindfulness, people always think, oh, it's breathing, or it's yoga, or those are methods of mindfulness. But being mindful is used in common parlance as being aware of what's going on, being aware of different solutions, different options. So as an example, being mindful and being aware of how your body reacts to certain situations, to certain triggers, that can help you manage for them in future. So it doesn't need to impact you, it doesn't need to affect you. One of the things that people may struggle with in the menopause is sleep or lack of sleep. So again, being aware that it's not something else causing that lack of sleep. So like stress, you could try a body scan And a body scan is a mindful, relaxing exercise. But what it does is, as you go through from your toes to your knees, you're checking your body, you're recognizing two things. First of all, you're recognizing, am I stressed? Because strangely enough, as you go through every part of the body, you may suddenly realize, oh my goodness, and for me, it's my jaw. My dentist knows when I'm stressed because I grind my teeth. But now I realize, oh, if this bit is a little bit tight, I must be under some sort of stress. So being aware of that, that's the first thing. But the second thing you can do whilst doing a body scan is tensing and relaxing each part of the body as you focus on it, because then you know the difference between when it's stressed and when it's not. And again, that's another way of recognizing your trigger before it gets unmanageable. So a lot of mindfulness is about getting back in touch with our body and knowing how we function and knowing what sets it off, knowing what relaxes it. And that's just a great way of preempting and preparing for anything that might come along. But also, if you find things that you like whilst you're doing all of that, it's another great way of boosting your energy, because do more of that. If deep breathing feels good, do it. If listening to classical music feels good, do more of that. For me, there is still a psychological barrier that I believe a lot of women have, and that is talking about the menopause. It means I'm getting older, and that isn't tackled in any of this. It was already, in a way, a bit of a stigma to be having HRT, even though we know it's so good. It's no one wants to talk about things like vaginal dryness. No one wants to talk about things that are causing problems with our sex life, because it feels embarrassing still. And I don't think that necessarily tackles that aspect of it. We need to almost have, but I don't mean make it a bit like I don't know, trash TV or anything like that. That's the other issue. I don't want to go too far the other way, but I think there's certain underlying issues which are not quite being tackled. It's great that the help is out there, but it's all very well being out there as long as we can find it accessible, and as long as people want to go access it. Right. Boots is, I think, trying to bring out a menopause range, but with menopause splashed all over the products, I don't know how many people would want to buy that. Yeah. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I don't know.
Yeah, to be honest, I think everyone wants to jump on the menopause bandwagon, and so many products comes out, and everyone try to do something. But for me, it's not about what's available. It's what really is useful for the women. You know, I think it's great, you know, if your company is offering you some day off. But would you rather have a day off, suffer on your sofa or in your bed, or, you know, find a way to just have no symptoms, because there are ways to have no symptoms, you know? It's great that it's discussed and in the open, but HRT is not always a solution for all the women. And
yes.
And the problem with HRT is that it works, but for it to, I mean, not only it's not for all women because of some exception, but also for it to work, you need to get the proper dosage, the proper hormones. And it's not just one pill and then everything goes away. It's bloody hard to get it, you know, dosed properly and make it work, because it can take a few months. So, and in the meantime, there is so much more that they could do with regards to managing stress, which is a massive trigger for menopause, and also eating, you know, a bit better. You shared about your own journey at perimenopause to be iron deficient. So how did you know it was iron and not like a thyroid imbalance? Because when you're low in energy, it could be so many things.
Yeah, I got lucky in that my health insurance at the time provided an all-over body check, and one of the checks was iron.
You got everything done. Yes, that's amazing.
Was great. And I could actually take that to my GP, and that was the only reason why they ordered or authorised a blood test for the NHS, and therefore to get me on a prescription. But you know what? It was the doctor, sadly, and I do not advocate this, the doctor of Google. If you've got no other way to turn, you start Googling symptoms. One of the big things for me, strangely enough, was I used to get these massive mouth ulcers, like huge ones, really massive white patches. And that came up as a symptom, and that was so unusual that I thought, oh, that's odd. and my nails were really brittle. They were breaking all the time. And you start putting those two together, and then I happened to get the test at the same time, and it was like, right, at least I've got an answer. I think one of the things that we women are very, very bad at is setting our boundaries. The reason I bring that up is sometimes with perimenopause, with menopause, brain fog is one of those things, and brain fog gets worse the more pressure you put on yourself. And if you learn to say no, or you are able to accept that no is a complete sentence, and you are able to limit how much you give to others, for the people that you are wanting to give to, you're going to be so much better. There is a tendency for women, caregivers, caregiving professionals perhaps, to just carry on and keep going and keep going. But I think we need to realize that if physically it is detrimental to our health, actually socially it's going to be detrimental to other people as well, because we aren't going to be at the top of our game. So probably one of my key messages is simply learning where your boundaries are and being brave enough to set them. You don't need to be rude to people. You can say things like, I can do it, but I can only do it between this time or that time. You can say to people, I'll tell you later, rather than saying yes straight away, because that gives you a little bit of time to think of an excuse if you have to. But one of my favorite tips is, rather than focusing on what you don't want to do and who you don't want to see, actively spend more time by seeking out people you do want to see, things you do want to do. For example, like this, it's very easy for me to then say to anybody, I'm really sorry, I can't tonight, I'm chatting with Severine. And that's something I want to do, I love to do it. I'm not lying to anybody else, but this is energizing me rather than perhaps something that drains me.
Oh, thank you so much. And with regard to supporting women, who do you think I should interview next? Someone who could help with a message or with some experience?
There's so many different aspects that you could take. So, for example, you could talk about, I don't know, CBD as a potential stress reliever. So somebody like Alexei Pikovsky from Alpha Green would be a great person to talk about the benefits and also the difference between what is cannabis related and what is not. So someone like that would be great.
Can you tell us more about your books, your 3 books, and perhaps introduce them in a few words and where we can buy them?
Yes, I'll just move it there because you can see some of them behind me. Right, the Midlife Guide to Resilience is the latest one, and this they're all very similar in the way they're styled.
Okay.
All of them come with the theory behind the topic I cover, and then exercises and workbooks. I am a qualified teacher. That is my background, that is my profession. And so the way I approach well-being, and my PhD was on the well-being of teachers and nurses and frontline personnel, is practical tools, practical ways of perhaps learning more about ourselves, practical ways of minimizing our anxiety, practical ways of improving our decision making or our life skills. And all of these books are very much written with that in mind. They are all business books in that because my PhD was given to me by the business school, even though it was focused on an aspect of psychology. But they are suitable for everybody. I mean, even the Leader's Guide to Anything, if you are a member of the family, you are probably a leader of sorts. If you are the organizer of your group of friends, you are a leader of sorts. So it is still relevant and applicable to you. And with that, I like to give you little things that you can do if you can't access help, or in the interim whilst you're waiting to access help, or the little things that you can do to manage those low-level issues that come your way. As I say with everything that I teach and I deliver, learning is a pick and mix. Try it. If it works for you, use it. If it doesn't, or you want to tweak it, that's fine too. Never go to an expert and think, oh my goodness, their word is law. because every single expert, we will be very researched in our own field, but our personal approach may not work for you. And that's okay. It's just that the more you listen to people, the more you learn from people, the more choices you have. And that's simply what I would suggest. Learn, read, find out more, but then do what works for you.
Can you remind us the titles and where to get them?
Yes, you can get all of them from Amazon. Leader's Guide to Resilience, A Leader's Guide to Mindfulness, and Be a Great Manager Now. They are all available on Amazon at the moment, or any online. I think Get Abstract is another nice bookstore to get this from as well. And Get Abstract does summaries too of all of the different books. They've got lots of this sort of self-help book.
And on your website, I believe there are links if they want to buy them.
Yes, you can find out more about me, read some of my articles and so on www.draudreyt.com. That's my website. Or you can find me on Instagram, which is @Dr Audrey T. But that will just give you a link to my website, really.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's been such a pleasure to discuss resilience, mindfulness, and all these tips that you've given us. Amazing. Thank you again.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Have a good night.
Bye, Audrey.